Hey everybody, Merry Christmas. Today's a special day for what we are going to share with you. Now, what you are going to see is going to be a blessing. At least we hope it's a blessing. You are going to see part one of a series we're going to do. We're going to air this part today, which is Monday, and then we'll air the next part on New Year's Day, and we're going to call it a year in review. Now, we might not title that on YouTube that way, but that's exactly what it is. And what you're going to see is you're going to see a bunch of what we think are really good clips from things that were shared throughout the year. Very important issues, some difficult subjects, some controversial, but lots of things that relate to not only your biblical education, but bringing in your biblical worldview. And so all of these will be anywhere from 3 to 5 to maybe 8-minute clips that show some really valuable stuff that we pulled from shows that we've done throughout the year. So we'll be doing this on New Year's Day as well, and it's just going to be a great time. With all of that said, if you're watching this on Christmas Day or New Year's Day, may you have a very Merry Christmas and a Spirit-filled, Christ-centered New Year. Listen, Christ could come at any moment. Jesus is coming soon. Let's watch and be sober, and we hope you'll be blessed with what we give you today in this show. There is going to be a level of strength within Israel that a lot of people have not seen in a long time. Now, we are going to talk about the implications for Lebanon and what has happened there with the maritime agreement that Lapid threw away like garbage, right? He threw away a portion of Israel's sovereignty in that area like garbage off the Mediterranean coast. We're going to talk about that in a second. But in essence, what will happen is within 3 weeks or so, I think probably much before that, we will see the government being solidified and strengthened. I believe in that time or very closely thereafter, Bibi Netanyahu is going to end up telling the government or telling the United Nations to go shove it. And I would definitely agree with his assertion if he ends up saying something like that, because the reality of it is they are going to start moving in the direction of a harder, more difficult, and assertive anti-Semitic bent, and Bibi isn't going to tolerate it, right? And it is very interesting because I don't think that Bibi is a very religious man, but what I do believe is that his ideals and thoughts concerning Israel and its sovereignty lines up with the religious conservative parties that, of course, are going to be lining up with him. Just a reminder, the Likud is not necessarily a religious conservative party, but they do, in essence, line up with the Zionist movement, which a lot of people make that to be a bad word. It's not. I believe in the sovereignty of Israel and its right to exist as a nation. I believe in the preservation of the nation of Israel, and I certainly believe that all nations, if they want to find out what is best for them, perhaps the greatest thing that they can do is support the nation of Israel. You go against Israel, you go against God, right? That's just the reality of it. And if you go against God, you're going to lose. It's really, really simple. Something that was said recently by the President of the United States. Actually, it was said last year. And I told you how absolutely ugly it was when it was actually said. I told you about my concern regarding this particular picture. And one of the things that a lot of people will just simply stop and say is that, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. All of this is a conspiracy theory. You don't understand, James. It's all a conspiracy. Really? Is it a conspiracy? I think it's a conspiracy until we actually see something happen. And then once we see something happen, then all of a sudden things change, and they change pretty quickly, don't they? I think that's the thing that's strikingly difficult to try to explain to people. Trying to get people to understand that what you call a conspiracy right now is actually something that's really happening. And I think the thing that's most important to communicate about all the political maneuvering that's happening is that I believe it's taking place as a direct result of deep state and globalists, which, by the way, are in direct conflict with one another,
manipulating and changing everything around us. These politicians are not doing what they're doing because they're ignorant or they're foolish. They're doing it because in many cases they're being controlled. The CIA is very effective in what they do. And if you don't believe me, consider what just happened recently. Consider the fact that evidence has manifested, hard evidence, that a sitting president was actually murdered by an intelligence agency in this country, and yet nobody has talked about it. The media hasn't talked about it. Nobody has talked about it. It's because we have very few politicians that are willing to stand up to the deep state. Very few politicians that are willing to stand up to all of these things that are going on. And I think these are the same group of people that are going to be used by the Lord to create the economy of the Antichrist that I believe is coming, and is coming sooner than everybody thinks. Satan is very good at perverting what God has made good. Satan is very good at twisting and attacking all that God has called and made sacred. You see, God is the one that created the heavens and the earth, and then God created human life, right? We read about it later on in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and on. It goes on to tell us that God created us in his likeness and image. That's what it says. And then it goes on in Genesis chapter 2, and you guys can look all this up. It's correct that he breathed life into us. Literally gave us the very soul that moves us and drives us. God is the one who has established everything in complete and absolute perfection. And the enemy hates it. And he will do whatever he can to attack it. He will create a fake version of it all. Now, the problem is, and the premise is, and I want you guys to understand this, abortion as we understand it today, and abortion as we understood it back in Bible times, and abortion as it has always existed, comes from one place and one place only, and always has. And this is why the hard left is losing their mind over the issue. This is why they're going absolutely crazy. This is why the neo-Malthusianists and everybody else that's out there that supports this stuff is losing their mind over what happened with Roe v. Wade last year. They're going crazy because the enemy has taught mankind to replace God, literally to lose consciousness of God by replacing God in and of themselves. That's exactly what's happening, and that's a direction that people are going, and everything that we see comes from that. The enemy has inspired the minds and the hearts of people to actually take on the characteristics of God and to assume that they get to be God, thus believing in their minds and hearts that there is no God, and changing as a result of it, right? If you think about it, God told Adam, don't eat of this. Don't touch it. Don't eat of this tree, right? Eve gets it handed down to her from Adam. Satan confronts Eve and says, hey, did God really say? I mean, come on. Eve says, well, God says we can't touch this. We'll die. Satan says, you're not going to die. As a matter of fact, you're going to become like God. You can see the tactic that the enemy used. It was the very first time we saw that being deployed. You're going to become like God. If you eat this, you'll become just like God. Well, that's attractive. The fruit looked good. It was attractive. It looked like it was something that was, it was pleasant to the eyes. Every aspect of it was wonderful. Go ahead. You'll become just like God. Well, sure enough, there was an aspect of her life and Adam's life that became very true. Her knowledge of good and evil through her experience of evil became something a lot more obvious to them, right? And yes, at that point, they chose through their rebellion against God, through the actions that they chose to yield to, they began to take on the idea or the thought that they could be God. And the reality of it was, because their desire to want to be God, whether or not it was expressed on its face or behind the corner, The reality of it is they began to destroy themselves. That's what happened. Do you think the rapture sets off the tribulation? Seems like it will mess things up for sure. I'm telling you this right now. We know biblically that the rapture does not set off the tribulation. What we do know is this. We also know that the rapture will be the very thing that allows the final Antichrist to be revealed. And it is the final Antichrist, per Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, that actually strengthens the treaty, the agreement, the peace, formalization, whatever you might want to call it. That actually is the thing that commences the tribulation. It's very important that we understand that. This is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, folks. We need to understand the fact that we are in a place right now where it can happen. The rapture. I can tell you with confidence that we're not going to see the second coming anytime soon because we have not seen the leading indicator that tells us that the second coming is going to happen. Think about it like this, folks. The start of the tribulation may actually happen without us knowing it's happening. First of all, we're not going to be here on this earth. I want that to be understood by everybody. We are not going to be on this earth. But what I want people to recognize is we know that the start of the tribulation will take place per Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, when the final Antichrist makes strong the peace treaty, the peace agreement. We know that. But how are you going to know that he did that publicly? He could have made strong the existing agreement that was put into place, and we might not hear the announcement about it, assuming that we're on this earth. As Christians, we won't be on this earth, but other people are not going to be able to use that as a sign, because what if he made the peace agreement in September of one year and it gets announced a year and a half later? Everybody will be expecting to wait 3.5 years for the final Antichrist to set himself up in the temple and demand to be worshiped, when in reality he might do that 2 years later because the tribulation commenced at that point. It might even be hard to be able to see signs of the commencement of the tribulation based on the information you read about in Revelation chapter 6. This is something that's very critical. Like, you guys have to understand this. The biblical foundation is really, really important. Pay attention to what's going on in the mind of Putin. During the Cold War, and even as we approached the end of the Cold War, thanks to the leadership of Ronald Reagan, understand this, folks. This is not something that we should be ignoring. When we were dealing with the greatest potential effects of nuclear proliferation, understand the fact, folks. People didn't mention nuclear war like we mention it today. Nuclear war did not come out of the mouth of world leaders. They never threatened a nuclear war. They never said this was a possibility. As a matter of fact, it was literally the nuclear option. It's why we didn't even talk about it. As a matter of fact, when the United States of America bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima, we didn't even talk about it then. It was taboo. You didn't talk about that being an option. I think even more importantly, everywhere you go now, there's discussion. Nuclear war, nuclear war, nuclear war. You have Putin, who his whole life never resorted to using terminology like this, and now is beginning to say things like, we won't hesitate to use nuclear weapons if we have to. You've got Zelensky throwing those words around like it's nobody's business. And you've got the rest of the world throwing words like that around like it's nobody's business. Folks, this all goes back to the lies that continue to be communicated. The reality of it is, if you want the truth about what's really happening in Ukraine, you don't need to look very deep, and you don't need to look very far. What's happening is you've got a very corrupt ruler that is in there who is doing absolutely everything he can to gain what's his, what he wants, yet at the same time, he's allowing himself to be controlled and manipulated quite well by the globalist regimes that are out there. You've got the United States of America, who will not let go of Ukraine. And the reason why the current ruler in our regime, known as the White House, will continue to submit to the evils that are known as the deep state and the globalists. Why? Because he himself was marked by corruption, and he himself has allowed himself. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. He has put himself in the bed of corruption and has made money. Listen to this, folks. Listen to this. This is an operable phrase. He has made money off the death of the future. Understand this, folks. The Bible tells us that Satan is the father of lies. I think we need to start off with that before we start talking about the United States government. I think it's important to talk about that before we start talking about the new forms of propaganda that are coming out of Ukraine. I think it's important that we establish this before we start getting into any of the issues related to Bible prophecy and the many things that we're constantly always discussing and bringing to your attention. Folks, understand what the Bible says. The Bible makes it clear that Satan is the father of lies. When he communicates to us, he seeks to communicate using deception that is powerful and strong. He is very, very good at questioning the truth. He does not like the truth to be heard or paid attention to by the people that are seeking it. He will do everything he can at any cost to divert people's attention from the truth. And of course, what he is even better at doing is he is better at communicating personal messages to you to seek to infiltrate your mind, to get you to believe things that God has made very clear to us as not being true. He not only wants you to start believing a lie, but he wants to twist what you know as true because God's word says it. And he wants you to actually believe something completely different because he is good at deceiving us, deceiving the whole world into thinking that God's word says something that it never intended to say. This is a normal par for the course that we see when it comes to all of this stuff. And Satan is undoubtedly good at doing this. Now, I think it's very important that when we consider all of this, we must stay as close to the truth as we possibly can. Perhaps one of the most painful things that I observe as a pastor who ministers to a lot of veterans, and police officers, is the fact that veterans are expected to go out in the battlefield, expose themselves to some of the most dangerous things mankind has ever witnessed, fight like literal hell for the betterment of their country, only to come home and be thrown away by the people that surround them. They are looked at as not useful because they're not on the battlefield anymore. Many cases, people view them as stupid, lacking intellect, which nothing could be further from the truth. Some of the smartest human beings alive right now are our veterans. But the reality of it is they are the most underutilized group of people that we have here in the United States of America. And if we had taken some time to establish the gifting that each and every single one of them have, as well as the ability that God has embedded within them to protect life and property, maybe we wouldn't have the kind of shootings that we see today. If we took the same kind of funding that we applied to allowing these men and women to fight for us on the battlefield, even when we're talking about political exploitations, and we we're able to allocate some of that to allowing them to guard our schools, to protect our families, perhaps my family would not be making the active and collective decision to homeschool our children. There's a lot of things that went into that, by the way. We're homeschooling our children for a lot of reasons. We're homeschooling our children because we want our children to be more socially adept. We want our children to be better in the way that they interact with people socially, which is why they're being homeschooled. We've chosen to homeschool our children because we want them to have a better education. We want them to be people who will better apply the amazing brilliance that God has given them over the years. But another fringe benefit that comes from homeschooling our children is that we're protecting them from savages. The reality of it is, what we are seeing in these shootings and what happened with this particular shooter is a direct result of a human being in their hatred and rebellion towards God, opening themselves up to a demonic realm that brings them to a place of self-mutilation, destruction, and the destruction of others. Understand Satan's endgame, folks. What Satan wants to do is destroy human life. That is exactly what he is good at, and he does it by planting doubt into the things that God has established as real. Let's not forget that. Let's not be lost concerning that picture. I think it's very important that we understand the mechanics of all of this. I think it's even more important that we stop ignoring the reality of everything that is taking place right now. And maybe for just 1 second, we stop to consider the reality of what is before us in this moment. If you want to correct the endemic of school shootings in this country, perhaps the greatest and single most powerful force that we can deploy to put an end to that has nothing to do with suspending guns. Quite frankly, on the contrary, our founding fathers recognized the need for guns to protect life and property, especially from the tyranny of government. That's not the issue here. The issue at hand has everything to do with addressing the spiritual. If we want to stop these shootings, we will address the spiritual. We will stop allowing people to give validity to the types of things that God never intended to be legitimized. COVID brings in lots of money to these Silicon Valley big tech companies, startups, all of that. Most of the money that was unleashed during COVID found its way into the tech sector. Bottom line, Silicon Valley Bank, in essence, lent a huge portion of that money, a huge portion, in hopes of protecting their interests to the federal government of all people. By the way, there was whoever was the person who was assigned to manipulate or manage risk aversion, which there wasn't anybody for months and months and months. What a stupid thing to do. All the banks do it, by the way. This is terrible to say. All the banks do it. But this bank decided that instead of going down the route where we're going to start vetting people, we're going to actually start creating loans that are actually reasonable, where we know we can protect our assets, they decided that they are going to give a loan to the federal government. But now, by the way, I just want to say this. Before everybody loses their mind and says, how stupid can SVB be by giving these loans to the federal government? I want you to understand why in the last 2 years it got way harder to get a loan for a home. We cannot blame banks like Silicon Valley Bank for doing what they did, because the reason why they chose to give loans to the federal government, by the way, in case you guys haven't picked this up, these are through treasury bonds, typically 10-year notes. But the reason why they gave the federal government these loans is because the federal government, in essence, forced them into giving them these loans. Think about it like this. COVID ensues. Lots of money floods the tech industry. All that money goes into banks like SVB. And SVB says, we need to figure out a way to manage our assets and to protect it from the inflationary mechanism that's going to be deployed pretty quickly here. By the way, I have so much to say about the Treasury Department, about the Fed, and all the other garbage that's going on right now. They're contributing to the mechanism of mass psychosis that I've been talking about for years. I don't even have the time to begin to get into the problems with that. But let me just simply say this, throwing that little jab in, because I had to throw that jab in. Understand, banks like SVB were faced with, okay, we have to protect our assets from the inflationary mechanism that we know is coming. We know that costs are going to go up. We know that the buying power of the dollar is going to drop, especially because these banks have been witnessing what we all call in the industry quantitative easing. It's a fancy, nice way of saying the U.S. government's printing more money. I told myself I wouldn't get on this issue, so I won't, because that's where I start beating up the Fed and getting on all of the crazy monetary policy that exists. And Trump did a little bit of kick the can down the road on this as well, but I'm going to argue with Trump. He had no choice. He had to do that. Had he not done it, he would have destroyed the U.S. economy. Jesus said this. He told us that there would be a time that would be coming where we would see these types of things taking place. He told us to be aware of these things, warned us about false prophets, told us that all of these things would happen. But did you know that God, when he had established his relationship with the nation of Israel, made a very important and distinct deal with them? A covenant. He said, if you will worship me, if you will obey my commands, if you will do what the Lord your God has asked you to do, you obey my commands, you obey my statutes, then you'll be blessed in the city, you'll be blessed in the country. You'll be blessed everywhere you go, everything you touch. It will be blessing, 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 blessing. God will not hold back his blessing. And this is a promise that he makes to the nation of Israel. Why? Because God chose the nation of Israel to be his people. They are undoubtedly his ancestrally chosen people that he chose to make an example to the rest of the world. As they would behave righteously, God would reward them. When they chose to rebel against him and behave unrighteously, God would then execute his punitive action against the nation, thus modeling to the rest of the world what happens when you rebel against God. So when the nation of Israel followed God, they were blessed. God said it. He said, you follow me, you obey my commands, you walk according to my statutes, blessed you'll be in the country, blessed you'll be in the city, everything you do, blessed will you be. But he says, if you walk away from the Lord your God, you deny the Lord your God, you ignore the voice of the Lord your God, cursed will you be in the city, cursed will you be in the country, and curse, 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 curse everywhere else. He made that very clear. By the way, it's interesting. When you look at the blessings that are listed there in the Old Testament, when you obey God, there's like a series of 16 or 17 blessings, and they are what I would like to call an all-encompassing picture. It is undoubtedly this amazing picture of God covering literally everything. When it gets to the curses, it's a section that's 3 times bigger than the blessing section. Because God wanted to lay out very clearly, literally every aspect of your life that he would curse if you rebelled against him. This is to the nation of Israel. Israel did not obey the word of God. Israel chose not to listen to God, and Israel was cursed by God because of their desire, their insatiable lust for sin. Now, I'm going somewhere with this because there's a remarkable difference between the promise that God made to Israel and the covenant that was established between the founding fathers of this country in the establishment thereof. You see, when God established his covenant with Abraham, and when he established his covenant with the nation of Israel, he promised that one day he would restore the nation. It was prophesied that they'd rebel against him. It was prophesied that they would go through tremendous turmoil. All of the things that they're going through was prophesied. With that prophecy, God made it very clear. He said, listen, I am going to restore you. I'm going to gather you back, even in unbelief. Ezekiel 37. Those were clear promises being made. Understand this, because this is important. Make no mistake. Do not get this twisted. Do not get confused. Do not get it backwards. That kind of promise was never made to the United States of America. And if we know that that promise was never made to the United States of America, how much more then should we consider the importance of walking in humility before the Lord and repenting and seeking God? I think what is particularly embarrassing is to see what happens when people recognize that what they are doing involves nothing but impure deception and evil and wickedness. And then instead of changing course and saying, I erred, I got carried away, I shouldn't have done this, what a mistake, they're not only doubling down, but then they are going out of their way, like the enemy, to hide the deception that they already know exists. We have a court system that was designed by our founding fathers, that was in essence based on biblical truth. And within that court system, there was a guiding light given to it, the Constitution. And the Constitution has made so many things clear for us when we seek to criminally prosecute anybody. Now, I'm going somewhere with this because this is important, because this story right here that continues to manifest itself everywhere regarding Tucker Carlson, what happened in the Capitol in January on that day, and what is going on by so many people who continue to cover up the lies, is something that we need to address, and we need to be very specific about how we address it. I'm going to go there. I will discuss this in a second, but there needs to be a foundation that's given to you, and the foundation is important. Let's get into that foundation. That foundation is critical. This is the foundation that directly relates to what the United States Constitution guarantees you as a United States citizen. And understand, as a citizen of the United States, it is illegal to not be afforded certain rights. In a court system, in the freest country in the world, you have the right to not incriminate yourself. In a court system of the freest country in the world, the pursuit of truth in the desire to bring justice must reign supreme, because it is assumed that the truth is the guiding light. And if you are going to criminally prosecute somebody, the goal in criminal prosecution is to establish a person's guilt because they are presumed innocent. Nationwide catalytic converter theft ring sting. With the kind of stuff that we have going on in our country right now, you would think, you guys, that we would actually start thinking differently about the way we're handling things domestically, right? Understand this, folks. You have American Airlines that just rejected, the American Airlines employees just rejected an attempt at a union contract. So flight tickets are about to go up. You've got short staffing at TSA right now All the TSA employees are beginning to walk out because they're saying they're not getting paid enough. Isn't that funny? A government employee saying that they're not getting paid enough because they're not doing enough, right? I think that's a crack up. No offense to anybody who works for TSA. How about the Midstream Corporation is looking for billions of dollars from Congress, and Congress is thinking about doing it. Colorado River fighting is going on right now. That's another crazy thing. If I had the time to tell you the implications of all of this put together to connect the dots for you, I think it would make you absolutely sick to your stomach. Wells Fargo mortgage staff braces for layoffs. Now, that's a big deal because a lot of the mortgages that we see in our country is tied to the activities of Wells Fargo. Ask me why at a time where I have 30 minutes to explain that. Right? You've got China getting a visit by German Chancellor, which is going to, in essence, reveal to us the kind of economic, what I would like to call, interdependence that exists between both of those nations. Why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because I believe that both of those nations are going to become inconsequential in the description of Bible prophecy. One becomes inconsequential because I don't think it's mentioned. The other one becomes inconsequential because it literally allows itself to be given to a much bigger coalition and then capitulates its power to the final Antichrist, right? Serbia is talking about drone attacks from Kosovo. Russia returns to what they call a Black Sea grain deal. Let me just tell you, that involves Turkey. I've been talking about that for a long time. This is their benevolent sort of food deal that they're talking about. That becomes really significant when we start talking about NATO and what's going on there. Germany is looking to revitalize what they call Brazil's Amazon Fund. That means they are going to help the cause of Brazil. And that has some interesting implications on the South American continent. We could talk about that all day if we wanted to. When we start talking about the Indo-Pacific region, North Korea, how about this, has already launched 23 missiles into the ocean. If one were launched, Little Rocket Man would get ripped by the former president of the United States. The White House is announcing, which they lie all the time, but the White House is announcing that North Korea is shipping artillery shells to Russia to, of course, help them or aid them in their battle with Ukraine. That may be very well true. How about this? How about Xi Jinping announces that China is going to start helping, this is an interesting thing, support Pakistan's financial stabilization efforts. So if Pakistan walks away from the mechanism of insolvency that they've been depending on for a long time, then that just means we have lit up the war between India and Pakistan, that potential coming again. And then we have also found a very, very, very close ally now with China in positioning itself against India. Folks, that is huge. That is not small. That is a big deal. Ezekiel makes it clear what's going to happen with Russia. I don't know the ins and the outs of what's going to happen specifically before that time. There's no way anybody can know those things. Now, we can do some analysis on the different points in the timeline, and then we can say that the lines will be connected from one dot to another, and it will probably go this way, but we might be wrong. God might take those lines in a completely different place. But we do know where the dots connect. We do know where the dots are. We know where the beginning is, and we know where the end is, because the one we worship is the beginning and the end. It starts with him, it ends with him, and he gives us the game plan. We know what the end game is going to be. We know that there will be a leader, Gog, presumably the leader of Russia in the region or with the region from the region of Magog. We are talking about the leader of Russia taking his country into a lead stand against Israel with a conglomerate of other nations. Iran, Sudan, Ethiopia, Turkey. There's a group of nations that they are going to be coming against Israel. They're going to be coming from the north. My guess is their entryway is going to be from the Syrian border for a lot of different reasons. I don't think I'm wrong about that. I think that if you can look at the scriptures make some pretty reasonable arguments about exactly what's going to happen. And when you look at the geography, there's only a few ways it can happen, right? Even with the land bridge issue that we continue to talk about, I'm telling you right now, I think that when an attack from the north ends up taking place, I don't think it's going to be coming from Lebanon or the Lebanese border, because if you look at the geography, you just examine how all of it goes, you will look at it completely differently. See if I can bring up a map for you guys so that you can potentially better understand the implications of what I'm talking about here. Because this is kind of important. So, well, it's not kind of important. It's very important. So let's just bring this up so that you guys can better understand what I'm talking about here. Take a look at the map. This will help you better understand things a little bit, because there are some things that are going to be hard to recognize or understand. But if you look at Egypt, okay, understand that as you go north, just start walking north. You see Cairo up there. Of course, that's Lower Egypt, believe it or not. Lower Egypt means north. I know it's a little backwards, right? As you begin to go north, you enter into this little area known as Israel. If they are going to attack Israel, and that attack is going to be from the north, you're definitely not going to do it through Saudi Arabia. You're not going to go around through Saudi Arabia, especially if you look at Saudi Arabia right now. At the base of Saudi Arabia, you've got that yellow map. I see it as blue in my head because the way I memorized that whole region was a different map than this, but this map's a little more visible for all of you guys. But you've got this yellow piece of land right below Saudi Arabia that is called Yemen. Saudi Arabia doesn't like its friends to the south. And the reason why they don't like their friends to the south is because there are people who act as proxies of Iran who continue to function with terrorist activity in a very aggressive fashion. These are the Yemenis Houthis. And so they are not a big fan of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is not a big fan of Iran, or really Iraq for that matter. But if you look at where Israel is, understand that where you're going to see the kind of attacks that will ensue, they are going to have to come from the Syrian area. We know what's going to happen. Now, when you go and you start going further north, which you cannot see on this map, you will begin to see Russia. You will begin to see Ukraine. You will begin to see all of these other areas north of the Black Sea, slightly north of the Caspian Sea. You will begin to see all of those areas brewing. And there is no way in the world that Ukraine, further south, is going to have any victory over the one nation that will be the dominant one when it pursues coming down. This is like, when you think about the craziness of what's happening in front of us right now, Hamas hates Israel. It is in their charter to destroy every last human life that is Jew. That's what they say. So their charter allows them to join up with the Shiites for the common purpose of destroying the enemy, as they would call it. But the funny thing is the attacks that are happening at the hands of Hamas continue to destroy Palestinian lives. Palestinian lives are the ones that are being lost more than any other group. Palestinians are suffering the most at the hands of what these people are doing in the name of trying to preserve Palestinians. People are not recognizing it for what it is. And folks, understand this. It is so clear. There is no other way. No other way. You can see it. Only reason why people are not recognizing it for what it is, like I said before, it's spiritual blindness. It's what we see. It's what we continue to see. It is spiritual blindness. And folks, it's getting darker. This is the thing that I continue to try to communicate to everybody. And that is the fact that the darkness is alive and well right now in our midst. I want you guys to see this and understand it for what it is. I want you guys to recognize it for what it is. There is spiritual blindness that is happening right now, and that spiritual blindness is growing in its aggression. By the way, some of you might be looking at me and saying, well, how does this translate with respect to Israel? Like, when you talk about all the things that you've just been talking about, what does that mean when Israel is in the place that it's in? I can tell you at the bare minimum, what it means. At the bare minimum, what that communicates to us is the fact that Jesus could come at any moment. But let's not forget that. He could come for his church at any moment. When are we going to wake up to recognize that? The stage is being set. All of the things that we expect to happen in order for the church to be raptured has already happened. Now we're beginning to see things happening that would appear to be stage-setting elements for what's going to happen in the tribulation. I don't know why people are not seeing this. New York City Council member Caroline Rivera organizes rally outside of City Hall to demand landlord accountability as the city recently reported 61,000 vacant properties while shelter census is high. Why do you think they would go out of their way to report 61,000 vacant properties? Look, there's a reason for that. Everything is being set up to literally go hot. That's what we're looking at here. This kind of stuff, you guys, starts off small and then ends up becoming something big. Starts off with what everybody calls low impact conflict, soft conflict, but becomes something really, really bad. Folks, let me just tell you something, okay? I'm going to repeat myself. The line has been drawn. Okay? The line has been drawn. It was drawn a long time ago, and folks, it has just been crossed. We are watching changes take place like we never thought possible. We are watching changes take place that we never thought would happen. At least not in our lifetime. Look, I don't know about you folks, but I believe every word that God says. Every single word in the Bible I believe to be true. The words of prophecy that come forth are just amazing when you think about it. When you stop for a second to think about the reality of God's word coming true every single day, folks, it's a pretty amazing picture. It's unbelievable. And the question that I think we need to be asking right now, and it's very, very important for us to be thinking this through. It's very, very important, right? Understand this. Understand. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's a matter of when it's going to happen. Don't forget that, folks. It's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. This is a video, again, of the President of the United States speaking. Now, I've shown this video to you guys many, many times. Many, many times. And I want you to pay attention to what's being said. We will play through it a few times in a row because I want you to hear what's happening here. Now, I'm going to play it initially, then I'll go back and play some things again that I want you to listen to. But take a listen to what's being said here.
You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people died, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway, I'm going to hush up, Mary, fire away.
All right. There's no such thing as a new world order. Come on, James, that's a conspiracy. How many times have I made a video on the new world order as described by the book of Revelation? And Facebook, YouTube, Instagram has actually posted warnings about it not being good information. There is no such thing as a new world order. It's a figment of somebody's imagination. First of all, let me just simply say this. The phrase new world order is a globalist term. It is a term that has been adapted by the globalists of our time, but it is not a deep state term. The deep state term is a different term. It's a term that they created. It's called the liberal world order. May have heard the president actually use that term first and then correct himself after using that term, because when he uses the term liberal world order, it is indicative of an agenda that has been created by the deep state to completely remove the freedoms of the citizens so that they may be able to enforce full, complete, and totalitarian control. One of the final steps of this, by the way, is to take control of the children. Parents should no longer have control over their own children. The state takes control of the children, and that is the direction that everybody is going in. I want you to pay attention to what he does here, because first of all, he tells us a couple of things that are key in this address. The first thing he tells us is he tells us that he was in a classified meeting. He tells us he's speaking to one of the highest ranking members in the intelligence and military community, and then goes on to disclose to us the contents of that classified discussion. In case you may have not recognized it, the contents of that classified discussion happens to be the number of casualties that are acceptable for death. The number of casualties that are acceptable in order to achieve the liberal world order. Listen closely what he says about the secure meeting he was in. I'm going to play it again. I want you guys to take a good listen to it.
You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day.
Let me repeat that again. Let me rewind it so you can hear that.
As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people died, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. We've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway.
Okay, I want to revert back to something he says here. Again, it's funny. There are advantages and disadvantages to somebody who is having cognitive disability when using that person to be your puppet, right? The advantage is oftentimes their inability to recollect the most basic of facts proves it to be a very safe way to get information out. The disadvantage becomes that there will be moments of glibness. There will be moments where he will remember certain facts, but does not have the capability of being able to determine what needs to remain quiet and what needs to be dispelled. Now, this becomes very interesting because it's an advantage to us as citizens because we kind of get a glimpse into what kind of evil they're actually doing. But it can be very dangerous on a national security level because if he begins to disclose information that could be detrimental to our national security or the security of our troops or operatives overseas, it can be a major problem. A huge problem. So, listen to what he says at the beginning of this. I'm going to stop it and rewind it because I want you to catch the subtlety of what's being said here. Pay attention to this.
You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world.
By the way, when he says an inflection point in the world economy, it is code for saying that we are watching certain transitions take place in the economy that open up the door for us to be able to insert ourselves in as a totalitarian regime to control the effect of the damage that's actually being done. Case in point, you're a millionaire. I take away all of your money, force you to operate in poverty for the next year, and then, in the name of being a good government who loves you and wants to take care of you, I offer to give you $100,000, and I say, here, you can live well on this. When mass psychosis settles in, you won't think about the $1 million you lost and the interest you could have earned in that. You'll simply think about the fact that $100,000 is going to be a huge relief from the life you've been living in the last year, and you will look at the government as not only your hero, you will look at the government as your daddy. It's the demarcation of the mechanism of mass psychosis that gets implemented, and it is part of totalitarian regimes doing what they do. The Bible tells us in Revelation chapter 6 that the final Antichrist is going to operate in that way. When we talk about the picture of a man who's riding a horse who has a bow but not an arrow, it means he will use non-military styles of force, namely duress, to be able to accomplish his purposes of totalitarianism. It's a human nature issue. And it is one that should not be discounted. Very important that we recognize that. Let's not ignore that. Let's not minimize it, because that's exactly what's going on.
Economy, not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations.
By the way, when he's pointing out that this inflection point in the local economy as well as the world economy takes place every 3 or 4 generations, he is giving us an observation that gets made by every totalitarian leader and regime that has ever existed on the face of the earth. And that is, there is a point in time where the strength of economies get tested, particularly by the mechanism of inflation that drives the destruction of the GDP. And when that testing point takes place, it is the perfect insertion time for totalitarian rule. That's how it works, folks. Understand, that's how it works. He's bringing that up. This is something he was talking about last year. I don't want us to lose sight of this. By the way, I still have not gotten into the 20 plus pages of intelligence reports that I have here talking about the things that are going on right now between South Korea, North Korea, China, things that are happening, believe it or not, in the Aegean Sea, the Black Sea, as well as the Mediterranean. When you start to begin to connect the dots of the things that are actually happening in the Ukraine right now, I suspect Monkey and I will spend a lot of time talking about that because there is a significant amount of stuff happening on that level. You begin to realize very, very quickly that things are changing, and they are changing at the hands of the Central Intelligence Agency. The economy looks like it's about to fail. The rich get richer. The poor get poorer. The political opportunity arises through the induction of mass psychosis. In other words, I'm going to make a problem for you that's so bad that you'll forget about how good it used to be. And then my solution is going to be a quarter of what you used to have, but you'll love me for giving you the solution. Think about it like this. I steal $100 from you, and I take away your ability to earn any money. 3 days go by, your family begins to starve. Your children are saying, I'm hungry. Your baby's crying for formula. You have nothing. And I go to you, and out of my own pocket, through my retail relationships, I spend $20 to give you all the food your family needs. Now, mind you, I'm the guy that stole the $100. And I go and I give you the food, and you go, you're my hero. I love you. You're so great. That's mass psychosis. That's what's happening in the United States of America. So we have this happen. COVID takes place. Terrible crisis. Terrible situation. They take complete advantage of it. It goes really bad. Things get really ugly. The United States government prints money, quantitative easing. They start injecting and infusing money in the bank accounts of every single person that is able-bodied and willing. They provide the solution that creates the mechanism of mass psychosis. You can comply by wearing your hijabs. We're going to force you into certain medical procedures. All of that stuff. And then you begin to look at the government as the hero because they're providing a solution for you. That's exactly what's going on here. So this is now where the government's at. The government says, all of these people that we gave this money to, we want them to fail because there's too much money out there. And with all that money out there, we are going to do away with our own dollar. And when we do away with our dollar, we want to do it under our terms. So what do? We start increasing the rate, the interest rate. The interest rate goes up. Businesses begin to fail. There's no more free money. Venture capitalists aren't investing. Money starts drying up everywhere. Banks go insolvent. And all that money that the government and the ruling class put out now goes back into the pocket. Literally goes back into the pocket of all of those people that originally gave it to you. The government has successfully given you the $20 after effectively taking away your $100. Biblical perspective on this. We are moving towards the economy of Revelation 13, ladies and gentlemen. We are moving into the economy of Revelation 13. Don't get it twisted. The feminist movement is the single most destructive tool ever deployed in human history towards women. It is. She was a dark, evil woman. From the year 1903 to 1910, Margaret Sanger was introduced to a series of Marxist and socialist radicals in the New York labor movement. I want people to understand that. She was primarily inspired by them. She was driven to a place of excitement over the stuff that she was beginning to learn. She had a belief. Let me read it to you. The belief was revolutionize society by breaking down sexual and societal morals. That was her belief. She believed that political revolutions require social and interpersonal revolutions because if people are moral, they will be immune to the political pipe dreams of revolutionaries. She actually believed that the social revolution began with the sexual revolution, and if you can sort of titillate the masses, that was her view, that's what she believed. If you can sort of hypnotize them in that way and break down their morals and their inhibitions, they'll be easier to control. That, by the way, comes straight out of Satan's playbook. That is exactly what Satan tried to do in Genesis and was successful in doing so. It comes right out of his playbook. She was directly inspired. In 1914, her very first published paper was actually called Women Rebel, right? This is a terrible, 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 terrible writing. Let me read one section from it, right? The slogan that came from this paper was, there are no gods and no masters. That's kind of what drove the force of this paper. By the way, I want you guys to understand, Adolf Hitler actually attributes much of his view in why he justified the murder of Jews through the writings of Margaret Sanger and her affiliates. He was influenced by her. I want people to understand this. This is really important. She depicted the vision of ideal woman. This was her description of an ideal woman. This is not a joke. This is straight out of her writings. Rebel women claim the following rights: the right to be lazy, the right to be an unmarried mother, the right to destroy, and the right to love. Sounds oddly familiar to the movement known right now as Black Lives Matter, being led by lesbian women who are literally not activists for the black race. They are activists for this type of movement right here. It's satanically inspired. Her writings on the sexual revolution, on contraception, by the way, many people might not know this, but did you know the term birth control that everybody uses today was a term that Margaret Sanger invented? I want people to know that. That was a term she invented. Nobody understood the term birth control. Birth control was not a term used prior to Margaret Sanger's existence, okay? I just want people to understand that. Her writings were so evil, so radical, that there were laws that she actually broke. She got indicted on 3 counts for publication of lewd and indecent articles in violation of the federal Comstock laws. And instead of taking her sentence, because she was facing 5 years of prison, she actually fled. She left the United States of America, and she gave her children to be raised by others, literally shipped them away to be raised by others. And she went to England as a fugitive of justice. Now, when she was in England, she became even more radicalized because she got introduced to the Malthusians. And if you don't know what Malthusianism in essence is, it's named after the early 19th century scientist Thomas Malthus. And if you don't know who he is, I would just tell you, that's an ugly, ugly, ugly man. Ugly, ugly, ugly man. He hypnotized the population into actually thinking. And this was his view. Like literally, this was his hypothesis. This is what he thought. I'll read it. The population of the world grows exponentially while food production doesn't, with the inevitable result of massive starvation. His whole view was something needs to be done to curb the overpopulation problem. By the way, that's what drives the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation right now. That's what drives the World Economic Forum. That is the premise behind all of those things that those guys are doing right now. That's what drives all of them. Klaus Schwab, that's what drives George Soros. All of those guys that are doing these evil things right now are driven by this Malthus ideal. That's exactly what it is.